Government sentencing memorandum in motion to depart from the applicable guideline range. The United States of America, by its attorney Zachary T. Fardon, United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, respectfully submit the following sentence memorandum and motion to depart from the applicable guideline range pursuant to USSG blah 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 whatever that means. With respect to the defendants, Pedro Flores and Margarito Flores Jr. Right there, I'd have been like, oh, you got the wrong person. My name isn't even on that. You put my dad's name on that piece of paper. I'm Margarito Flores Jr. Mistrial, get me out of here. Introduction. In 2008, Pedro Flores and Margarito Flores voluntarily broke away from their positions in the highest echelons of the cartel world to transform themselves into extraordinary witnesses. Despite great personal risk to themselves and their families, the Flores brothers amassed substantial evidence that directly allowed the government to build cases, which were unprecedented in this district, targeting the leadership structure of the two Mexican cartels. Not only did the Flores brothers' actions facilitate the targeting of these criminal enterprises from the top down, but their cooperation further enabled the government to completely dismantle the Flores brothers' own organization and convict over a dozen large-scale domestic customers, as explained in further detail below. The Flores brothers' unparalleled assistance to the government sufficiently offsets their considerable criminal culpability to such a degree that the government recommends that the court impose sentence at or near the low end of the agreed range, 10 to 6 years imprisonment set forth in the plea agreements. So this was the argument between if they were going to get 16, 14, 10, 12, whatever. And the judge threw it around in the middle. 14, no, not in the middle. He threw it towards the high side. Dropped them 14 years. They did 12 and a half. Procedural background. Defendants surrendered themselves to the custody of the U.S. Marshal Service on or about November 30th, 2008, and were subsequently charged in the first, second, and third superseding indictments in this matter with conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute and to distribute controlled substances in violation of Title 21, and a conspiracy to import a controlled substance into the United States in violation of Title 21. On August 22nd, 2012 and August 23rd, 2012, defendants pled guilty pursuant to plea agreements to count one of the third superseding indictment. The offense conduct. Between May 2005 and December 2008, the Flores brothers operated a Chicago-based distribution cell for the Sinaloa cartel and the Beltran Leyva organization. On average, this cell received 1,500 to 2,000 kilos of brocaine per month. Approximately half of this brocaine was distributed to the Flores brothers' Chicago area customers. The other half was distributed to customers in additional cities, including Columbus, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., Detroit, and Vancouver. In particular, the Flores brothers negotiated directly with the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel and BLO, as well as their principal lieutenants, to obtain large shipments of brocaine and heroin on credit. The Flores brothers knew that the cartels transported brocaine from Colombia to Mexico using multiple methods, including planes, boats, and submarines. The rugs provided to the Flores brothers were then smuggled across the U.S.-Mexico border using cartel transportation infrastructure. Once inside the U.S., the drugs were transported to the Chicago area using a system of stash houses, warehouses, and vehicles with hidden trap compartments. Clavos. In Chicago, a team of workers operating at the Flores brothers' direction were responsible for offloading the rug shipments, storing the rugs at various stash houses and warehouses, distributing the rugs to customers, and collecting and packaging rug proceeds. The rug proceeds were then transported back to Mexico once more through the cartel's infrastructure, where they were delivered to the Flores brothers and their sources of supply. Objections to the PSR. The government concurs with guideline calculations in the defendant's PSRs and does not have any objections or suggested corrections to the PSRs. Defendant's cooperation and government's motion to depart from the applicable guideline range. The government submits that the defendants have provided the full and truthful cooperation required by their plea agreements. Accordingly, pursuant to the terms of the plea agreements, the government now respectfully moves this court to depart from the advisory guideline range and sentence defendants at or near the low end of the agreed range of 10 to 16 years set forth on the plea agreement. They didn't do that. They didn't do that. Judge stuck it to him. Judge stuck it to him and said, nah, go and take this 14. The defendants earned their departures through extraordinary cooperation. The defendants jointly decided to dissolve their criminal enterprise and cooperate with the government. Pedro Flores first met directly with a DEA agent assigned to the Chicago Field Division and then NDIL AUSA in early November 2008. During this meeting, Pedro agreed on behalf of both brothers to cooperate for a period of time and then surrender to U.S. authorities. The Flores brothers then proactively cooperated until their surrender on November 30th. So that was all those 9 months before that. They were, trying to get Chapo on tape, and they were, knocking down loads and doing whatever they could do with no help from the government. And they surrendered on November 30th, 2008. That's when they got pulled, and that's where Val's exodus from Mexico began. The brevity of this proactive cooperation was dictated by its extreme risk, heightened by the fact that the multiple seizures described below caused the Flores brothers to quickly incur massive debts to the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel. Again, to incur debts that wasn't their thing, and if the government would have let them just continue to do business, nobody would have had any whiff of what was going on. But the government they serve two masters, you know what I'm saying? And they really don't give a shit about, if the twins got, if they got hot because these loads getting hit, and the next thing you know, they're gone. They don't give a shit about that either. Werner Heim said, do you think the 3Bs had anything to do with them getting the 14 instead of 10? I think a lot of it. I think even what's happening to the women now might have, it sounds crazy and it sounds petty and little, but the United States government is petty and little. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would think that even making an example out of the women the way they did is probably has something to do with a lot of this stuff. Like, the 3Bs ain't just it. There's a lot of little things that these dudes could have been heard about that they, use them as an example. The women and the twins. The government didn't care, just use you for what they can. Exactly, you're disposable. I mean, they're no different from the heads of the cartel. Everybody's disposable. You're a paper plate, man. Real talk. They can sit there and joke with you and laugh with you while you sitting there doing your interrogation, but they don't like you. They won't like you. You're disposable. Elizabeth Green said it's been a tactic since the beginning of time when people are trying to be sneaky or can't face their rivals, but it is still ratting. I know men that were real men. This is unbelievable to me. Here's what you got to understand, Elizabeth. I agree. Here's the thing about Mexico and the cartels. This is a weapon for them. Cooperation is a weapon for them, right? Doesn't make it any better, right? But at the end of the day, yeah, there's a bunch of dudes that stand tall here in America, and it's our culture. It's no snitching. Woo. Over there, they don't give a shit. They'll call the police to pick you up to bring you to them. Like, it's all blended and mixed in together. To me, they're all cooperators. I can't keep pushing the same line over and over. Oh, they're cooperators. They're cooperators. So is he. 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 We'll be talking about it forever. But I understand your frustration. I understand where you're coming from. And I agree. There are men out there that stand 10 toes down and they ain't going to say a word, and they'll be there 30, 40 years. They'll do their time and they never rat nobody out. And that's their thing. That's cool. But playing in this game, now you got to really understand that the cartel culture is we use power. And if power means we're going to use the police, if power means we're going to put you in jail, if power means we're going to cut down your family, then that's what they use. People that choose Chapo, you didn't hear him screaming Mayo's name? You didn't hear him saying he was just a patsy? He did the whole Lee Harvey Oswald. Nobody talks about that. We pick and choose, right? Why? Because we pick and choose because we got a relative. We pick and choose because we got a friend that stood down or got ratted on and this and that. We pick and choose. They don't pick and choose. It's at random. Everybody's disposable and anybody can get it. Debriefing the Flores brothers to attain all of the historical information they possessed took approximately 6 months of near daily proffer sessions. During this process, the Flores brothers provided information freely and to the best of their abilities. They each testified before the grand jury numerous times after the raw information they provided had been distilled and to organize statements on each of the categories of defendants. These statements led directly to the charging of approximately 54 defendants in 2009. Following their testimony, the Flores brothers were sent to Board of Prisons facilities outside of Chicago, but still continued their cooperation through frequent telephone proffers and in-person visits by the government. This ongoing cooperation has led directly and indirectly to multiple additional defendants being charged and has contributed to probable cause findings in search warrants and wiretaps through the use of information provided by the Flores brothers, attributed to them as confidential sources in affidavits filed in support of such requests. The Flores brothers' cooperation against cartel leaders. As part of the proactive cooperation in Mexico, the Flores brothers interacted with multiple high-level cartel members and associates to negotiate the acquisition of loads of cocaine and heroin. Where possible, the Flores brothers recorded these conversations. In total, the Flores brothers recorded more than 70 conversations with cartel members, many of which were associated with seizures of drugs or money in the United States facilitated by the Flores brothers. Of great significance, the recordings made by the Flores brothers included 2 conversations recorded with the then leader of the Sinaloa cartel, Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo, multiple conversations with Chapo's son and lieutenants, Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, and multiple conversations with a courier for Chapo, all regarding a 20-kilo shipment of heroin in the Northern District of Illinois. Specifically, the Flores brothers negotiated the load with Chapo and Alfredo and recorded multiple conversations with Alfredo regarding these negotiations and delivery logistics. The Flores brothers then arranged for an undercover agent to pose as a courier for the Flores brothers organization and take possession of the heroin in the district. After this delivery, the Flores brothers recorded 2 conversations directly with Chapo during which they negotiated a price reduction. I got a comment in the comments today that said, well, they weren't ready for that life. Look, he was asking him for a reduction. You're missing the point, Papa. He was asking him for a reduction so that he could draw him into saying something specific that he needed him to say on that recording that would stick in court. And that's why I can't have the conversation with everybody all the time. Again, I don't know things. I get clarification. I get perspective the farther we go into the story. But the things we know are the things we know. Price reduction from $55,000 per kilo to $50,000. In the recordings, which have been voice identified as Chapo by multiple additional cooperating witnesses, Chapo acknowledged both the conspiracy's existence and the agreed terms. See, he acknowledged both the conspiracy's existence and the agreed terms. He had to get him to agree to something. Following this agreement, the Flores brothers recorded equally inculpatory conversations with Alfredo to arrange for payment of heroin. These recordings and accompanying seizures and NDIL form the basis of a strong case against Chapo and Alfredo. The Flores brothers orchestrated similar seizures and made additional explicit inculpatory recordings involving numerous additional Sinaloa cartel leaders in doing so. For example, in October 2008, Margarito Flores met directly with Chapo, Sinaloa cartel leader Mayo Zambada, and his son Vicente, and multiple high-level Sinaloa cartel lieutenants, including Felipe Cabrera Sarabia. During this meeting, Mayo instructed the Flores brothers to work with Cabrera Sarabia to distribute heroin in Chicago. Following the meeting, the Flores brothers recorded a series of calls with Cabrera Sarabia setting up a 15-key heroin delivery in Chicago. As with the heroin from Chapo, the Flores brothers arranged for a UC, an undercover agent, to pick up the heroin from Cabrera Sarabia's courier. The Flores brothers then used the 2 shipments of heroin received from Chapo and Mayo as a predicate to record multiple conversations with the Sinaloa cartel leadership, including the 2 conversations with Chapo referenced above, although later lab testing performed by DEA revealed that both shipments of heroin had purity levels above the 90th percentile. The Flores brothers used a ruse that the heroin received from Mayo was of inferior quality. See, that's what the guy in the comments couldn't understand. He's like, look at them, they want to drop the price. Look at them, they took absolutely good, pure work and complained about it like it was bad just to get dude to say something. It was a tactic. It was a strategy. Although the lab testing performed by the DEA revealed that both shipments of heroin had purity levels above the 90th percentile, the Flores brothers used the rules that the heroin received from Mayo was of inferior quality to the heroin from Chapo in order to further the cooperation. The Flores brothers asked Chapo to agree to a reduced rate because it was harder for them to pay promptly due to their difficulties in distributing the lesser grade heroin from Mayo. The Flores brothers recorded similar conversations with Cabrera and VZN which is Vicente, discussing the heroin shipments and the payment made afterwards. All told, the recordings made by the Flores brothers with respect to the two heroin deliveries and seizures were invaluable in building cases against numerous leadership level figures in the cartel. In addition to the heroin conversations, the Flores brothers likely facilitated massive brocane seizures backed by recorded conversations that directly allowed the government to charge additional high-ranking cartel members. In November 2008, the Flores brothers negotiated the purchase of just over 1 ton of cocaine from BLO leader Arturo Beltran Leiva. The Flores brothers also involved Manuel Fernandez Valencia in this load by partnering with him on the purchase. At the time of the transaction, the Sinaloa cartel and BLO were engaged in a bloody war. So they was on both sides, smashing it on both sides. Due to the proclamations from both cartels that their associates were forbidden from working with the other side, the Flores brothers' simultaneous engagement and cooperation against the Sinaloa cartel and BLO was highly perilous. Yeah, dangerous as shit. Beyond the ever-present danger of having their cooperation discovered, either side could have reacted violently had they discovered that the Flores brothers were engaging in transactions with the enemy. This danger was discussed. See, you guys are telling me that they ratted because they were scared, right? But they pulling off Mission Impossibles over here. You know what I'm saying? So they ratted to get out. I don't know if fear in some point was a factor. But to say they not built, they weren't built, they didn't do, I mean, they're kind of right. They pulled the whole fucking thing here. They pulled the whole Mission Impossible. Everybody be having comments about how pussy they are. They was pulling off Tom Cruise Mission Impossible shit right here. Beyond the ever-present danger of having their cooperation discovered, either side could have reacted violently had they discovered that the Flores brothers were engaging in transactions with the enemy. This danger was discussed in depth in recorded conversations with Fernandez Valencia and one of Beltran Leiva's lieutenants referred to as El Músico. Following the recorded telephone negotiations, the Flores brothers facilitated the seizure of approximately 1,044 keys of brocane in Los Angeles that was ultimately bound for Chicago. Chapo felt it. He even says, "Hey, cabrón, I thought it was hard to move. Greed got him at the end. Always go with your spidey senses." He could have easily caught on to something right there. This is how thirsty the greed is. You ready? Val ran into a dude that the twins rolled up in a restaurant. Dude called her and them all kind of rats. Armando calmed him down and told him, "Hey, dummy, my brothers are not rats." He said, "Okay, can I get some work then?" That's how far the greed goes. Chapo did the exact same thing that Buddy in the restaurant did. The exact same thing. Went against his gut and thought with his pocket. Beltran Leiva, Fernandez Valencia, and Músico were all charged in 2009 in connection with this transaction. Beltran Leiva was subsequently unalived in Mexico. Fernandez Valencia was arrested in Mexico, extradited to the United States, and his case remains pending before Judge Guzman, and Músico remains a fugitive in Mexico. Músico is a boss now. Similarly, the Flores brothers negotiated another approximate 574 key cocaine load from Chapo's cousin and Lieutenant Juan Guzman Rocha, which is Juancho. As with other shipments, the Flores brothers recorded a number of highly inculpatory conversations with Guzman Rocha and then facilitated the seizure of the brocane in Los Angeles area before it was transported to Chicago. These recordings and seizures served as the linchpin of the case against Guzman Rocha and provided further corroboration of the involvements of others in the conspiracy, including Chapo. Guzman Rocha was subsequently unalived in Mexico in cartel-related violence. In addition, the Flores brothers recorded an in-person conversation with Alfredo Vasquez Hernandez regarding a 276 key brocane load. Even though the drugs were not seized, the Flores brothers' cooperation still enabled the charging of Vasquez Hernandez. Finally, the Flores brothers further recorded conversations and facilitated seizures of Sherwin, which ultimately led to Tomas Arevalo Renteria being charged with the drug trafficking offenses to which he has pled guilty before this court. All of these seizures in rapid succession placed the Flores brothers in grave danger in Mexico. When directed by the government to do so on November 30th, 2008, the Flores brothers surrendered to U.S. authorities and were ultimately transported to this district. The focus of their proactive cooperation then shifted to their wholesale customers in the United States, who are as of yet unaware of the Flores brothers' cooperation or extraction from Mexico. Beginning on December 1st, 2008, the Flores brothers placed a series of recorded calls to their customers to set up enforcement actions by the government. The Flores brothers negotiated the delivery of shipments of brocaine to the customers, who were then arrested when they showed up to pick up the brocaine. The Flores brothers' proactive cooperation, coupled with their grand jury testimony and the cooperation of the Flores brothers' workers, who are addressed below, led to the charging of more than a dozen high-level customers who received on average 500 to 100 keys of brocaine per month. Each of these customers either pled guilty or was found guilty following trial. In the ordinary course, each of these cases, made almost exclusively through the Flores brothers' cooperation, would merit exceptional consideration at sentencing. These defendants served as the primary link between the cartel suppliers and wholesale and retail. There was a direct line from the top to the street. And wholesale and retail distributors in Chicago and elsewhere in the country. While not as high profile as the cartel figures, the successful prosecution of these defendants made a very real difference in combating the scourge of drug trafficking that fuels so much violence and the destruction of communities in Chicago. The Flores brothers dismantled their own organization. Through their cooperation, the Flores brothers facilitated the complete dismantlement of their organization. As with the customers, each of the Flores brothers' workers were convicted after they were charged. While the Flores brothers' actions in this regard represented downstream cooperation against comparably less culpable defendants, these prosecutions were nonetheless essential to the overall success of the case to ensure that none of the workers rose up to fulfill the void left by the Flores brothers' voluntary surrender. Wow. So they was trying to crush everybody so that nobody came up and took their black book. The Flores workers were collectively responsible for the distribution of ton quantities of brocaine and the laundering of more than $1 billion through the course of the conspiracy. In addition, the Flores brothers' cooperation spurred many of the workers to cooperate as well. In addition, the Flores brothers' cooperation spurred many other co-workers to cooperate as well. These workers had dealt directly with customers and cartel couriers, and the cooperating workers' testimony was invaluable in securing convictions against these defendants. As such, the Flores brothers should also receive credit for causing this cooperation to occur where it is likely that it would not have otherwise, at least in as timely a fashion and on the same scale as the mass cooperation that followed the disclosure of the Flores brothers' cooperation to the workers. So they're saying that because the twins flipped, a lot of people flipped, and they wouldn't have flipped as quick, and they wouldn't have flipped as many of them if the twins weren't there doing this. So he's selling the twins to the judge. Flores brothers' cooperation directly assisted in extraditions. The Flores brothers have also signed multiple declarations that were submitted to the government of Mexico as part of a successful extradition request from multiple defendants in this district, including Vicente Zambada Niebla, Alfredo Vasquez Hernandez, and Tomas Arevalo Renteria. The Flores brothers have also signed or have agreed to sign at the appropriate time declarations for additional NDIL defendants in Mexico. They redacted this next sentence. Each of these declarations has been or will be made known to the defendants for whom extradition is sought, placing the Flores brothers in increased danger of retaliation. The Flores brothers' cooperation has also provided valuable intelligence and actionable information to DEA, FBI, HSI, and ATF offices throughout the country and in Mexico. Analysis of the sentencing factors set forth. Factors are difficult to apply in a traditional sense to these defendants. Each of the factors contribute to the issue at the heart of the sentencing, striking an appropriate balance between criminal conduct that likely qualifies the Flores brothers as the most significant rug traffickers in Chicago's history against cooperation that almost certainly qualifies as the most significant in rug trafficking and money laundering context in the history of this district. Taking even the low end of the average quantity of brocaine distributed by the Flores brothers per month, 1,500 kilos, yields a total amount of 64,500 keys over the course of the charged conspiracy. This is an almost incomprehensible quantity of brocaine to be distributed in Chicago and other communities throughout the United States, with resulting harm that is incalculable, but without question horrific. However, they are not being sentenced absent cooperation. Instead, in order to determine a sentence that is sufficient but not greater than necessary to accomplish the 3553 goals, the defendant's conduct must be offset by cooperation that is unprecedented in the district. This balance affects each of the 3553 factors. So that's the factor of this whole memorandum. Seriousness of the offense. With respect to the seriousness of the offense, this court is well aware of the factual circumstances of this case, and the government will not belabor those facts here. In short, the defendants operated at the highest level of rug trafficking in the world. While they themselves were not cartel leaders, they were the pipeline that allowed those leaders to push tons of rugs into the hands of wholesale customers, who in turn fed the destructive distribution machines that exist throughout this country. While the cartels have found other outlets, the Flores brothers were so successful a channel for the cartels that they created massive economies of scale, which made it significantly easier and more efficient for the cartels to distribute rugs hundreds of kilos at a time with substantially reduced risks. But consideration of the seriousness of the defendant's offense goes hand in hand with consideration of the Flores brothers' cooperation. For example, and briefly mentioned earlier, the Flores brothers facilitated the arrival of 266 keys of brocaine in Chicago that had been transported by co-defendant Alfredo Vasquez Hernandez. In the process of facilitating the rug's arrival, the Flores brothers recorded a phone conversation with Vasquez Hernandez discussing the load. They also provided a detailed explanation of how the load was picked up by one of their workers in Chicago. This evidence led to the successful prosecution of Vasquez Hernandez. But providing such evidence to the government on such a significant rug load and rug trafficker would not have been possible absent the Flores brothers' own involvement in serious high-level intentional, international, and domestic rug trafficking. With respect to this particular facet of cooperation by the Flores brothers, however, the court must also consider not just the results of their cooperation, the successful prosecution of Hernandez, but also the way in which it came to be. One aggravating factor of the Flores brothers' cooperation is their failure to report the arrival of the 276 keys of cocaine. I said it. Resulting in its distribution in the Chicago area. I guess that's the load that they didn't catch. They let that one through, and the feds was mad about it. One aggravating factor of the Flores brothers' cooperation is their failure to report the arrival of 276 keys of brocaine, resulting in its distribution in the Chicago area. The fact that the Flores brothers caused such a vast quantity of brocaine to be distributed, rather than seized by the government during the pendency of their cooperation, certainly offsets some of the positive results they otherwise achieved. In other words, they couldn't get away with shit. They weren't going to allow them to make no money. Them dudes let one get through, and they was mad about it. Again, another reason to try to make examples out of them. You know what I'm saying? When asked by the government why they initially failed to report this brocaine, the Flores brothers stated that they needed the money from this load to avoid the danger of falling too far behind in their payments to the cartel, which is something that the government didn't understand because the twins was as disposable to them as they were to anybody else and as much as anybody is to each other. Despite their initial failure to report the load following their surrender, the Flores brothers told the government about the existence of the load and provided a detailed explanation of how the load was picked up by one of their workers in Chicago. While this candor in no way excuses their actions in allowing the drugs to be distributed, it did preserve their credibility and enable their further and ongoing cooperation. So they let it get through, but then they smashed somebody with it to appease these fools. As to this particular load, that cooperation helped lead to the conviction of Vasquez Hernandez, who admitted to his participation in moving the drugs. As to this transaction and others, the Flores information and testimony has been consistently and compellingly corroborated by witnesses, documents, rugs, and asset seizures, and dozens of recordings. Beyond their grand jury testimony, the Flores brothers have not been called as live witnesses in any other judicial proceedings. The brothers have been and remain prepared to testify truthfully in court. To date, the government has exercised its discretion to not to call them. Among other factors, the government must consider the extreme danger associated with physically producing the brothers in any venue outside of their protected custodial locations. This risk and the steps and resources required to mitigate the risk have weighed heavily in the government's decision not to call the brothers to date. To be clear, however, the government believes the Flores brothers are viable and credible witnesses, and the government anticipates using them in the future. The seriousness of the offense is also highlighted by the enormous sum of money involved in the conspiracy. In total, the Flores brothers admitted to facilitating the transfer of approximately $1.8 billion of rug proceeds from the United States to Mexico, primarily through bulk cash smuggling. Even after paying the cartel sources of supply and other expenses associated with running their organization, the Flores brothers profited mightily from their rug trafficking. What became of the Flores brothers' profits was a heavy focus of the government's investigation. The Flores brothers were extracted from Mexico on a few hours' notice and left millions of dollars of assets behind in Mexico, including numerous homes, properties, and vehicles. Although the Flores brothers provided a truthful accounting of these items, because they were not lawfully obtained in Mexico in the Flores brothers' names, the government was not able to successfully pursue forfeiture or seizure. The Flores brothers themselves came to the United States via airplane with the little but clothing and the evidence they gathered in Mexico. Their family members entered the United States with a small number of personal belongings, a relatively small amount of cash, and multiple high-end vehicles that they were driving. There you go. That corroborates what Val said. They was in the best cars driving through the dirt trying to get here, you know. The government's investigation revealed allegations that the Flores brothers facilitated the collection of millions of dollars of rug proceeds from customers in the United States who still owed debts to the Flores brothers. The allegations continued that the Flores brothers had caused this money to be secreted from the government through multiple means, including through burying money in various locations. So they had customers that still owed debt, and then the government said they were going to bury this shit. In response to this information, the government took several investigative steps, including exhaustive asset checks of the Flores brothers, their family members and associates, as well as a simultaneous and separate interview of the Flores brothers and their family. The Flores brothers both admitted to causing their associates to collect approximately several $1 million of rug proceeds from a customer in the Washington, D.C. area shortly after their arrival in Chicago in December 2008. The Flores brothers further admitted that they took these actions without reporting them to the government, even though they were otherwise actively cooperating. This money was then transported back to Chicago and used by the Flores brothers and their families, at times for impermissible reasons, without informing the government, including for the purchase of a Bentley as a gift for Pedro Flores' wife and other wholly inappropriate expenditures. The remainder of the funds collected, totaling more than $4 million minus $300,000 total, was provided to the Flores family to provide for their sustenance and security. So they were just thrown $300,000 and said, live. Provide for their sustenance and security, and legal fees paid to the attorneys were voluntarily surrendered to the government and are subject to forfeiture pursuant to the terms of the defendant's plea agreements and the agreed motion for a preliminary order of forfeiture filed with this court. The government went to elaborate lengths to determine whether the Flores brothers were truthful. The government found no evidence of the existence of additional funds. Without credible evidence to the contrary, and after an exhaustive investigation, the government does not believe that the Flores brothers are hiding assets from the government or this court. Accordingly, the government does not believe that the Flores brothers' assets to be a factor in this sentencing beyond the above described conduct of collecting, hiding for a limited period of time, and improperly using funds without informing the government. Need to promote deterrence. The need to promote deterrence is also impacted by the Flores brothers' culpability cooperation balance. The need for individual deterrence is minimized to large degree by the extreme hurdles that the Flores brothers would face in any attempt to return to drug trafficking. As two of the most well-known cooperating witnesses in the country, the Flores brothers and their families will live the rest of their lives in danger of being unalived in retribution. They are essentially surrounded on all sides by some of the most violent actors in the criminal sphere. The barbarism of the cartel is legend, with a special place reserved for those who cooperate. Having cooperated against not only the leadership of the cartels, but also their sons, family members, and the closest associates, the Flores brothers would in all likelihood be unalived absent their protection from the government. As an illustration, against the direct admonishment of the government not to do so, the Flores brothers' father re-entered Mexico in 2009 after the government facilitated his entry into the United States for his own protection. Within days, the father was kidnapped and presumed unalived. A note left at the scene of the kidnapping made explicit that the father was taken as a direct consequence of the Flores brothers' cooperation. The Flores brothers also faced danger of retaliation from their former U.S.-based associates. These threats make a return to drug trafficking next to impossible for these defendants. The need for general deterrence must also be considered. Again, in the ordinary cause, this case would scream for a substantial sentence to deter others from engaging in similar conduct. This remains a necessity here. The Flores brothers are in a way the ultimate success story for a criminal perspective, from a criminal perspective. They rose from street level drug trafficking in Chicago all the way to the top of the cartel world, along the way earning millions of dollars in profit. From the point of view of an aspiring drug trafficker, this success would be something to emulate, and considerable prison sentence would be appropriate to deter others from attempting to follow suit. This need for deterrence, however, must be offset by legitimate interest in promoting cooperation by those engaged in criminal activity. In this regard, the Flores brothers represent perhaps the best case scenario for high-level cooperation in the narcotics realm. The Flores brothers began their cooperation on their own accord before they were arrested, and while they still had the full faith of their co-conspirators. The results they obtained would not have been possible had they waited until they were in custody before beginning to cooperate with the government. And as detailed above, once they began cooperating, their cooperation was extraordinary and hugely impactful. For this reason, an appropriate balance must be struck between general deterrence and fostering cooperation as a viable alternative to persisting in a high-level criminal enterprise. Personal danger and risk. The issue of personal safety and risk is also relevant to appropriate sentence under 3553. The Flores brothers and their families are forever at risk due to their cooperation. The government remains confident in its ability to protect the Flores brothers even after they've served their prison sentence. However, the threat to the Flores brothers and their family will continue to affect them after they serve any sentence imposed through limitations on their freedom of movement, necessary in order to ensure their safety, and through the ever-present fear of retribution that will exist, regardless of what steps are taken to ensure their protection. This fear often serves as a complete bar to defendants who are contemplating cooperation. That the Flores brothers overcame this fear and put themselves in a position to gather the extraordinary evidence they did is yet another exceptional aspect of their cooperation that serves to offset their criminal liability. The defendant's history and characteristics. The culpability cooperation balance is relevant to an analysis of the Flores brothers' history and characteristics. Since they were teens, the Flores brothers have engaged in an unbroken chain of criminal conduct that culminated in their status as massive distributors for two notorious and violent cartels. This is a long history that would normally justify a long prison term. However, as described above, the Flores brothers' cooperation serves as the counterbalance. An additional element to these competing dynamics is the Flores brothers' history of violence or lack thereof. For obvious reasons, a violent history calls for a substantial sentence and greatly reduces the credibility and viability of a witness. Now remember this when we start talking about these other guys, when we start talking about the guys that got less time than the twins gave up less information and had more bodies on them. A raw deal is a raw deal. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the government has not uncovered any acts of violence performed by the Flores brothers that could be corroborated by sufficient credible evidence. This is, again, why I believe if they had any bodies on them, they would have proffered that shit. They would throw that shit in the proffer. Because if they find it now, they're popped. The government did learn of 2 specific allegations of violence. Uh-oh, here we go. Wait a minute, let me see what this is. Oh, okay. This was allegations, though. These are just allegations. The same shit we always hear. The government did learn of 2 specific allegations of violence. That the Flores twins were involved in the murder of Redacted in Chicago. And that the Flores brothers were involved in the unaliving of Guadalupe Ledesma in Mexico. The government reviewed the entire file of the investigation of these unalivements by state authorities and found no credible evidence of the Flores brothers' involvement. Moreover, multiple defendants were convicted for the unalivements, including a defendant who cooperated with the state. Yo, what kind of country am I in where I gotta change words that are not cuss words, that are not offensive words? It's crazy. YouTube got its own country going on. Flores brothers' involvement. Moreover, multiple defendants were convicted of these unalignments, including a defendant who cooperated with the state. The defendant did not implicate the Flores brothers in any way. Lupe Ledesma was a former associate of the Sinaloa cartel to whom the Flores brothers, that's Tío Lupe, Flores brothers owed a debt. Supposedly owed a debt. A single witness has stated that he was told by others that the Flores brothers were directly responsible for Ledesma's unalivement. Well, before the witness's statement, the Flores brothers described to the government the circumstances of Ledesma's unalivement. According to the Flores brothers, Ledesma caused Pedro Flores to be kidnapped over a rug debt. Pedro Flores was later released after payment was made and Chapo intervened. The Flores brothers stated that Ledesma lied to Chapo over the circumstances and amount of the debt and that Ledesma was ultimately unalived. The Flores brothers denied any involvement in his unalivement. The Flores brothers further stated that Chapo offered them the opportunity to unalive Ledesma, but they declined by stating that they did not want to engage in violence. The competing version of events from other witnesses is largely the same with respect to the lead-up events. However, the witness stated that the Flores brothers were actually responsible for Ledesma's unalivement. Although the government has found this witness to be credible in the past because the government has not corroborated the witness's statement in any way, the government does not believe that there is sufficient evidence, even by a preponderant standard, to conclude that the Flores brothers were responsible for this murder, unalivement, and accordingly do not believe that these allegations should affect their sentence. Here we go. Government sentencing recommendation. Parties agreed in the plea agreement in this matter that the defendant should be sentenced to no less than 10 years and no more than 16, and that the parties shall be free to recommend any sentence within the agreed range. The government recommends that the court impose sentence at or near the low end of the agreed range. A sentence at or near the low end of this range strikes the appropriate balance between culpability and cooperation, accomplishes the sentencing goals set forth in 3553. Wherefore, conclusion, wherefore, for the reasons stated herein, the government respectfully requests that the court depart from the applicable guidelines range and sentence defendants at or near the low end of the agreed range, 10 to 16 years imprisonment set forth in the defendant's plea agreements. Respectfully submitted, Michael Ferreira and all these other guys.